Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great day. Tonight's story begins with a simple ride request and a cruel rejection based on nothing but judgment. Hours later, fate turns everything upside down when the same man is trapped in a burning car, and the only person who stops to help is the driver he humiliated. Stay with us until the end, and don't forget to subscribe if you believe real character is revealed in moments no one expects. The curbside clock read 8:17 p.m. when Marcus Allen eased his grab into position under the glow of a flickering streetlight in downtown Los Angeles. Traffic hummed past, a steady river of impatience and horns. Marcus checked the app once more. Pickup confirmed. Passenger name, Ethan Walker. 5-star rider, short trip. Marcus straightened his shoulders, adjusted the green grab jacket, and put the car in park. He had been driving since noon. 12 hours already, maybe more if you counted the slow crawl between fares. His back ached. His eyes burned. The faint smell of sweat lingered, the honest kind that came from working too long in a city that never cooled down. He had wiped the steering wheel, sprayed the seats, cracked the windows. Clean, respectable, ready. A man approached from the sidewalk. White, late 30s, clean haircut, expensive blazer draped casually over one arm. He stopped at the passenger door, glanced at the license plate, then at Marcus through the glass. His face tightened. He leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, and sniffed the air. Once, twice, like he was testing something unpleasant. Marcus noticed. Of course he did. The man didn't open the door. Instead, he stepped back, raised a hand, and shook his head. "Sorry," the man said, loud enough for passers-by to hear. "I'm not getting in." Marcus blinked. "Is something wrong, sir?" The man's lips curled, barely. "Yeah, it smells." The word landed heavier than it should have. Smells. Marcus felt the heat rise in his neck. He glanced down at his jacket, at his hands, at the interior of the car. Clean seats. Freshener still hanging from the mirror. Nothing out of place. "I just cleaned the car," Marcus said calmly. The man scoffed, covering his nose with his sleeve. "No offense, man. I just don't want to ride like this." People slowed as they walked past. A woman with shopping bags glanced over. A couple near the crosswalk stopped talking. Marcus held the man's gaze. There it was, the familiar tightening in his chest. The calculation. Do I respond? Do I explain? Do I defend myself? He'd learned the cost of each option. "I can cancel the ride," the man said, already pulling out his phone. "This isn't what I paid for." The app chimed. Ride canceled by passenger. The sound was soft, polite, final. The man turned away without another word, already tapping at his screen, already moving on. Marcus remained still. The engine idled. The streetlight buzzed overhead. No one said anything. No one needed to. Marcus exhaled slowly, hands gripping the steering wheel just a second too long. He could feel the eyes on him, not hostile, not kind, curious, uncomfortable, gone in moments. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't report the passenger. He put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. As the city swallowed him again, the app spoke in its neutral tone, unbothered by what had just happened. "Searching for your next rider." Marcus drove. He thought of his mother back home, the way she coughed through phone calls, apologizing for being a burden. He thought of the bills waiting on his kitchen table. He thought of the last warehouse job he'd lost when the company downsized and the manager wouldn't look him in the eye. He thought of how tired he was, of working, of proving, of swallowing moments like this and calling it professionalism. Another notification popped up. Another fare. Marcus accepted it without hesitation. That was the thing about humiliation. It didn't stop the meter. It didn't pause the bills. It didn't change the fact that tomorrow would still demand effort. At the next red light, Marcus caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark brown skin, tired eyes, jaw set tight, not with anger, but restraint. He straightened the mirror and drove on. If you're listening right now, stay with this story. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, because what happened next wasn't about revenge or karma. It was about a choice made in seconds that would expose the truth about dignity, bias, and what it really means to be human. Because just a few hours from now, the man who walked away would be screaming for help on a dark stretch of road, and Marcus Allen would be the one who had to decide whether to stop. Marcus Allen drove east, letting the neon blur of downtown Los Angeles stretch and smear across the windshield. The city was loud, but inside the car there was a quieter noise, the echo of a single word that refused to fade. Smells. He hadn't heard it shouted. He hadn't heard it with anger. That was what made it worse. The calm disgust. The casual dismissal. The way the man had covered his nose like it was instinct, not cruelty. Marcus rolled down the window an inch. Night air rushed in, cool and sharp. He welcomed it, even if it carried the exhaust of 1,000 cars. He breathed slowly, counting the seconds between each inhale like he'd learned years ago. Control the breath. Control the moment. Don't let the moment control you. The Grab app chimed again. New request. Pickup in 3 minutes. Marcus tapped accept without thinking. The car turned onto a quieter street, storefronts dark now, metal gates pulled low. A mural slid past. Bright colors painted over cracked concrete. A woman's face lifted toward a sky that didn't exist. Marcus barely noticed it. His hands stayed steady on the wheel. That was the thing people never saw. They assumed silence meant nothing had landed. That calm meant it didn't hurt. They were wrong. Silence wasn't empty. It was heavy. Marcus remembered the first time he'd learned that lesson. Years ago, in a warehouse break room, a supervisor had joked about background checks when Marcus applied for a promotion, laughing like it was harmless. Marcus had smiled then too, kept his voice even, lost the promotion anyway. He remembered standing in line at a convenience store once, clerk watching him while everyone else browsed freely. He remembered the way people's shoulders tightened when he walked behind them at night. He remembered being taught, over and over, that reacting made things worse. So, you swallowed it. You carried it. You kept moving. Marcus pulled up to the next pickup spot. A young woman slid into the back seat, earbuds in, barely glancing up. "Hi," Marcus said. She didn't respond. He drove. The ride ended quietly. 5 stars. No comment. Another fare followed. Then another. Time blurred into red lights and green arrows, into quick hellos and quicker goodbyes. The city thinned as night deepened. Marcus checked the clock. 11:42 p.m. He should have gone home. He thought of his apartment, small, quiet, with the envelope of bills waiting on the counter. He thought of his mother's voice on the phone earlier that week. "Don't work yourself sick," she'd said. He'd promised he wouldn't. He lied. The app chimed again. Ride canceled by passenger. Reason: changed mind. Marcus exhaled through his nose. Changed mind. He wondered what that really meant. He pulled over at a red light on Santa Monica Boulevard, the street stretching wide and empty ahead. Music hummed softly from the radio, something slow, something old. He reached for the air freshener and adjusted it, more out of habit than need. A flicker of anger rose, brief and hot. He let it pass. Anger was expensive. It cost focus. It cost energy. It cost time. Marcus needed all three. The light turned green. He drove on. A few blocks later, traffic slowed unexpectedly. Brake lights flared ahead, red and frantic. Marcus eased off the gas. That was when he saw the smoke. At first it was thin, curling lazily into the air like fog, then thicker, darker. Marcus leaned forward, heart ticking up a notch. A car sat angled against the median, front end crushed, hazard lights blinking wildly. Debris littered the road. Someone shouted. Another car swerved around the scene. Marcus's foot hovered over the brake. He could keep going. Plenty of people already had. He slowed anyway. As he rolled closer, a familiar shape caught his eye. A silver sedan, its driver's door bent inward, windshield spiderwebbed with cracks. Marcus's chest tightened. He recognized the car, not the plate. The man. White. Late 30s. Clean haircut. Blazer tossed in the passenger seat. Ethan Walker. The same man who had stood on the curb hours earlier, covering his nose, shaking his head. Marcus's car came to a full stop. For a moment, he didn't move. The night pressed in. Sirens were distant, not close enough. People stood at the edge of the scene, filming, murmuring, unsure. Marcus's pulse thudded in his ears. He could drive away. No one would blame him. No one would even know. He'd already done his part, already taken the insult, already moved on. The engine idled, smoke thickened. Then Marcus heard it, a sound that cut through everything else. A voice. "Help! Someone help me!" Fear stripped bare. Marcus's jaw tightened. This wasn't about pride. It wasn't about fairness. It wasn't even about forgiveness. It was about who he was when no one was watching. Marcus opened the door. If you're still with this story, now is the moment where everything changes. Subscribe to the channel and stay with us, because the next decision Marcus makes will put him face to face with the man who humiliated him, and the outcome will test what dignity really means when the past is still burning. He stepped out of the car and started running toward the smoke. Marcus Allen didn't think. The moment his feet hit the asphalt, instinct took over. Years of discipline. Years of learning how to stay calm when others panicked. The heat from the wrecked car rolled toward him in waves. Smoke poured from the crumpled hood, thick and acrid, stinging his eyes and throat. The streetlights above Santa Monica Boulevard cast a harsh yellow glow over twisted metal and scattered glass. "Sir, stay back!" someone shouted from the sidewalk. Marcus ignored them. Inside the silver sedan, Ethan Walker was trapped. The driver's door had folded inward, pinning his leg. Blood ran down his forehead, mixing with sweat. His hands clawed at the steering wheel, breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "I can't get out!" Ethan cried, voice cracking. "Please, please help me!" Marcus slowed as he approached, forcing himself to breathe evenly. Panic was contagious. He couldn't afford it. "I'm here," Marcus said firmly. "Look at me." Ethan's eyes darted wildly, then landed on Marcus. For a split second, confusion flickered across his face. Recognition followed. Not full understanding yet, but something close. "You," Ethan whispered. Marcus nodded once. "Yeah, it's me." Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't think—" "Not now," Marcus cut in, calm but commanding. "Listen to me. Can you move your arms?" Ethan tested them, wincing. "Yes." "Good. Stay awake. Focus on my voice." Marcus glanced at the engine. Flames hadn't started yet, but the heat was rising fast. He knew that smell. Fuel. Oil. Danger. He braced himself against the door and pulled. It didn't budge. Marcus gritted his teeth and tried again, muscles straining. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he didn't stop. Behind him, a few bystanders gathered, phones raised. "Someone call 911!" Marcus shouted without turning. "I already did," a woman yelled back. Good. Marcus reached down, grabbed a loose piece of metal from the road, and wedged it into the doorframe. He leveraged his weight against it, breath coming heavier now. The metal groaned. The door shifted, just enough. "Okay," Marcus said, voice steady despite the burn in his arms. "I'm going to pull you out. When I say go, you push with your good leg." Ethan nodded frantically. Tears streamed down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Marcus didn't respond. Apologies could wait. "Now," Marcus said. They moved together. Ethan screamed as his trapped leg slid free, skin scraping against twisted metal. Marcus caught him, wrapped an arm around his chest, and dragged him away from the car. They collapsed onto the pavement just as flames licked up from the hood. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan lay on his back, shaking uncontrollably, eyes fixed on the burning wreck. "I thought I was going to die," he sobbed. Marcus knelt beside him, hands firm on Ethan's shoulders. "You're alive. Keep breathing." Sirens wailed closer now. Ethan turned his head slowly, staring up at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. "You didn't have to come back," Ethan said hoarsely. "After what I said to you. After what I did." Marcus held his gaze. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't." The words landed heavier than any accusation. Ethan's face crumpled. Shame flooded his features, raw, unmistakable. "I judged you," Ethan whispered. "I humiliated you." Marcus nodded once. "Yeah." A beat passed. "But I'm not going to let you die because of it." Tears spilled freely now. Ethan reached out, fingers trembling, and grabbed Marcus's sleeve like it was the only thing anchoring him to the world. "I don't deserve this," Ethan said. Marcus didn't pull away. "No one deserves to die alone on the road," he replied. The first police car screeched to a halt, then an ambulance. Paramedics rushed in, taking over, voices sharp and practiced. "What's his condition?" "Leg injury, possible concussion," Marcus said quickly. "He was conscious the whole time." A paramedic nodded, impressed. "You did good." They lifted Ethan onto a stretcher. As they did, Ethan reached out again. "Please," he said weakly. "Don't leave." Marcus hesitated. He hadn't planned to stay, but something in Ethan's eyes stopped him. "I'll walk with you to the ambulance," Marcus said. As they moved, the crowd parted. Phones lowered. Whispers followed. Ethan gripped Marcus's hand as the doors closed. "Thank you," he said, voice barely audible, "for seeing me as human, even when I didn't do the same for you." Marcus squeezed his hand once. "Focus on living," he said. "We'll talk later." The doors slammed shut. The ambulance pulled away, sirens cutting through the night. Marcus stood there alone on the road, smoke drifting upward, the wreck still burning. His heart pounded, not with anger, not with triumph, with the weight of what he'd just chosen. If you're still listening, stay with this story. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts, because in the next scene, the consequences of this choice will follow both men into the hospital, where words finally catch up to actions. The automatic doors of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center slid open with a soft hiss, swallowing the chaos of the street behind them. Inside, the air was cold, sharp with disinfectant and urgency. Bright white lights flooded everything, leaving no shadows to hide in. Marcus Allen stepped inside slowly. He hadn't ridden in the ambulance. He'd followed in his car, hands steady on the wheel, even as his chest felt tight the entire drive. Now he stood just beyond the emergency entrance, the weight of the night settling into his shoulders. Ethan Walker was already being rushed down the hallway on a gurney. Possible internal bleeding. Leg trauma. Blood pressure dropping. The words echoed, clinical and unforgiving. Marcus watched from a distance as nurses and doctors moved with speed and precision. He stayed where he was, near the wall, out of the way. He knew this space. Hospitals had a way of stripping people down to what mattered: fear, hope, truth. A nurse approached him. "Are you family?" Marcus shook his head. "No." "Friend?" Marcus hesitated. "I'm the one who pulled him out of the car." The nurse nodded, already moving again. "Thank you for staying. Someone will speak with you." Marcus leaned back against the wall, arms crossed loosely over his chest. His hands still smelled faintly of smoke and metal. Minutes stretched. Then footsteps approached, fast, uneven. A woman in her mid-30s rushed into the waiting area, hair disheveled, eyes wild with panic. "Ethan?" she called. "Where's Ethan Walker?" A receptionist pointed down the hall. "Emergency surgery." The woman's knees nearly buckled. Marcus watched as she pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting tears. A moment later, she noticed him, standing alone, jacket stained with soot. "You were there," she said. It wasn't a question. Marcus nodded. "He was in an accident." "You're the one who saved him," she whispered. Marcus didn't correct her. He didn't confirm it either. She stepped closer. "Thank you," she said, voice shaking. "I'm his sister." Marcus inclined his head slightly. He was conscious when they brought him in. Her breath hitched. Did he say anything?" Marcus thought of Ethan's hand clutching his sleeve. The apology whispered through blood and smoke. "He asked me not to leave," Marcus said honestly. The woman nodded, tears spilling freely now. "That sounds like him. When he's scared." They sat in silence. Time passed differently in hospitals. Every second stretched, heavy with possibility. Finally, a doctor approached. "Family of Ethan Walker?" The sister stood instantly. Marcus rose too, though he stayed a step back. "He's stable," the doctor said. "We were able to stop the bleeding. He has a fractured leg and a concussion, but he's going to recover." Relief crashed over her. She sobbed openly, covering her face. Marcus exhaled slowly. "He kept asking about you," the doctor added, looking at Marcus. "The man who pulled him out." The sister turned sharply. "He did?" Marcus met her gaze. "I was just there." The doctor nodded. "He's drifting in and out, but he's asking for you by description." A pause. "You can see him," the doctor said. "Briefly." Marcus followed them down the hallway. Ethan lay pale against the white sheets, tubes and wires surrounding him. His eyes fluttered open when Marcus stepped closer. "Hey," Marcus said quietly. Ethan's gaze locked onto him immediately. His lips trembled. "You came," Ethan whispered. Marcus nodded. "I said I would." Tears slid down Ethan's temples into his hair. "I thought you'd disappear, like I deserved." Marcus stood beside the bed, hands relaxed at his sides. "Why?" Ethan asked, voice weak. "Why did you help me?" Marcus didn't answer right away. "Because tonight wasn't about you," Marcus said finally. "It was about who I am." Ethan squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing silently. "I judged you," he whispered. "I made you feel small. I acted like you were less than me." Marcus watched him carefully. "You did." Ethan nodded weakly. "And you still saved me." "Yes," Marcus said. The sister stood frozen at the foot of the bed, absorbing every word. "I don't know how to live with that," Ethan whispered. Marcus leaned forward slightly. "Start by remembering it." Ethan opened his eyes again. "Will you come back?" Marcus considered the question. "I'll check on you," he said. "But healing is your part." Ethan nodded. Marcus turned to leave. As he reached the door, Ethan's voice stopped him again. "I'm sorry," Ethan said. "Not because I almost died, but because I showed you who I was." Marcus paused. "That's the only apology that matters," he said, without turning around. He walked out into the hallway, the hospital lights reflecting off the polished floor, exposing everything. If you're still with this story, stay here. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, because in the next scene, the world will learn what happened that night, and both men will have to face what comes after the truth. Morning arrived quietly over Los Angeles, but the night before refused to stay buried. Marcus Allen woke to the soft buzz of his phone vibrating against the wooden nightstand. For a moment, he didn't move. His body felt heavy, as if the smoke and sirens from the accident were still clinging to his skin. He reached for the phone. Missed calls. Unknown numbers. A text from a friend he hadn't spoken to in years. "Bro, is this you?" Attached was a link. Marcus sat up slowly and opened it. A shaky video filled the screen. Headlights flashing, people shouting, a burning car on Santa Monica Boulevard. Then the camera zoomed in. Marcus saw himself, running toward the wreck, pulling a man from twisted metal, kneeling on the pavement, holding him steady. The caption beneath the video read, "Black Grab driver saves white man who rejected him hours earlier." Marcus closed his eyes. He hadn't wanted this. The video spread quickly, shared by local pages first, then picked up by larger outlets. Comments poured in, some full of praise, others dripping with disbelief, and a few trying to twist the story into something uglier. Marcus didn't read them all. He didn't need to. Across town, Ethan Walker woke up in a hospital bed, the room washed in pale morning light. His leg was elevated, wrapped in thick white bandages. Pain pulsed through his body in dull waves, but it wasn't what kept him awake. It was the memory. Marcus's face, calm and focused, leaning into the smoke without hesitation. A nurse entered quietly. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" Ethan swallowed. "Like I shouldn't be alive." The nurse offered a small smile. "You're lucky. Very lucky." Ethan nodded. "Where's my phone?" The nurse hesitated, then handed it to him. The screen lit up instantly. Messages, notifications, missed calls from coworkers, friends, even distant relatives. And then he saw it, the video. His stomach dropped. "That's him," Ethan whispered. "That's the man I insulted." The nurse glanced at the screen, then back at Ethan. Her expression changed. Not judgmental, just quiet. "You should rest," she said gently. But he stayed longer than anyone else. Ethan closed his eyes. Later that day, a reporter stood outside the hospital, microphone in hand, speaking to a camera. "This story has ignited conversations across the city," she said. "A man rejected from a ride for discriminatory reasons later saves the very person who turned him away." Ethan watched the broadcast from his bed, his sister seated beside him. "They're not letting this go," she said softly. "They shouldn't," Ethan replied. When the nurse left, Ethan turned to his sister. "I need to say something, publicly." She studied him. "Are you sure?" Ethan nodded. "I don't get to hide from this." That afternoon, Marcus sat in his car, parked along a quiet side street. He hadn't accepted a single ride request since waking up. The app remained open on the dashboard, waiting. He wasn't afraid of work. He was tired of being seen only when something dramatic happened. A knock tapped gently on his window. Marcus looked up. A woman stood there, holding a phone and a press badge. "Marcus Allen?" she asked. Marcus lowered the window slightly. "Yes." "I'm not here to film," she said quickly. "I just wanted to ask, why did you go back?" Marcus considered her question. "I didn't go back," he said calmly. "I never left." The woman blinked, caught off guard. "That's all I'm going to say," Marcus added. She nodded, respectful. "Thank you." As she walked away, Marcus started the car. That evening, Ethan went live. No network, no anchor, just him, sitting upright in a hospital bed, face pale but eyes clear. "I need to say something," Ethan began, "because the man who saved my life deserves more than silence." He swallowed hard. "Yesterday, I refused to get into a car because of who the driver was. I judged him. I humiliated him. And hours later, when I was trapped in my own mistakes, he came back and pulled me out." His voice cracked. "I don't deserve what he did, but I'm alive because of it." The video ended there. No excuses. No justification. Marcus watched it later that night, sitting alone in his apartment. He didn't smile. He didn't feel victorious. But something in his chest loosened. Not because Ethan apologized, but because the truth had been spoken out loud. If you're still listening, stay with this story. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, because in the next scene, when the noise begins to fade, the real test will be whether anything actually changes. The city moved on faster than Marcus Allen expected. 2 days after the accident, Los Angeles was already distracted by something new. A celebrity scandal, a political argument, a heat wave. The algorithm did what it always did, pushed yesterday's truth aside for today's outrage. But for Marcus, the silence that followed was louder than the noise before it. He returned to work, not because he wanted to prove anything, not because he needed redemption, because rent was still due, because his mother still needed medication, because life didn't pause for moral moments. Marcus accepted his first ride of the day just after sunrise. The city looked different in the early hours, less guarded, less performative. Streets were washed in pale gold light. The air was cooler. People were quieter. A man climbed into the back seat near Koreatown, coffee in hand. "Morning," Marcus said. "Morning," the man replied, glancing up. His eyes lingered for half a second, then widened slightly. "Hey," the man said slowly. "Aren't you—" Marcus met his gaze in the rearview mirror. Calm. Neutral. "Yes," Marcus said. The man hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you for what you did." Marcus returned his attention to the road. "You're welcome." Nothing more was said. The ride ended. 5 stars. No comment. Later that afternoon, Marcus stopped at a gas station on Western Avenue. As he filled the tank, a woman approached him cautiously. "I hope this isn't weird," she said. "But my son saw that video. He asked me why the driver helped the man who hurt him." Marcus screwed the cap back on and faced her. "What did you tell him?" She swallowed. "That sometimes doing the right thing isn't about fairness." Marcus nodded. "That's a good answer." She smiled softly. "Thank you." Moments like that followed him through the day. Not applause, not praise, just recognition. Across town, Ethan Walker felt the change in a different way. He sat upright in his hospital bed, laptop open, watching the same city move without him. His leg throbbed constantly, a reminder that pain could be loud or quiet, but always present. His phone buzzed. A message from his boss. "Glad you're alive. Let's talk when you're out." Another from a friend. "Saw your video. That took guts." Ethan stared at the screen. Guts. He thought of Marcus, running toward fire while others stepped back. He closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. When Ethan was discharged 3 days later, he didn't go home. He asked his sister to drive him somewhere else first. They stopped outside a modest apartment complex in East Los Angeles. Ethan sat in the car for a long moment, heart pounding harder than it had during the accident. "You don't have to do this," his sister said gently. "I do," Ethan replied. Marcus opened the door after the second knock. He looked surprised, but not alarmed. Ethan stood awkwardly, leaning on crutches, guilt written plainly across his face. "I won't take much of your time," Ethan said. "I just needed to say this to you directly." Marcus stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment was simple, clean, quiet. They stood facing each other, no cameras, no audience. "I've replayed that night over and over," Ethan said. "The way I looked at you, the way I spoke to you. I hate that man." Marcus studied him carefully. "Good." Ethan blinked. "Good? It means you're not protecting him anymore," Marcus said. Ethan nodded slowly. "I don't want to be him again." Marcus crossed his arms loosely. "Then don't be." Silence stretched between them. "I didn't save you to teach you a lesson," Marcus said. "I saved you because I don't want to become someone who lets bitterness decide who lives." Ethan's eyes filled. "I don't know how to repay that." Marcus shook his head. "You don't repay it. You pass it forward." Ethan nodded. "I will." When Ethan left, Marcus stood in the doorway watching him go, not satisfied, not relieved, but lighter. That evening, Marcus called his mother. "I saw the news," she said softly. "You okay?" "I'm okay," Marcus replied. She paused. "You did the right thing." Marcus smiled faintly. "I know." If you're still listening, stay with this story. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, because in the next scene, both men will face the long-term consequences of that night, and we'll see whether change lasts when the spotlight is gone. Time did what it always did. It tested intentions. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The city no longer whispered Marcus Allen's name. The video had been buried beneath newer headlines, newer arguments, newer distractions. For most people, the story was over. For Marcus, it wasn't. He noticed it in subtle ways. Some writers were warmer now, overly polite, almost careful with their words. Others avoided eye contact completely, unsure how to act around him. A few still acted the same as always, distant, distracted, indifferent. Those were the ones that told the truth. Marcus preferred them. He continued driving long hours, navigating Los Angeles traffic with the same patience he'd always had. He didn't bring up the accident, didn't correct people when they recognized him, didn't seek validation. But one evening, near Hollywood Boulevard, something happened that reminded him why moments like that night mattered. A young man flagged him down late, swaying slightly when he got into the car. His clothes were clean but rumpled, his voice sharp. "You one of those drivers from the news?" the man asked, leaning forward. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. "I'm just your driver." The man scoffed. "Figures. Guess they make heroes out of anyone these days." Marcus felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Here it was again. The test. He said nothing. The man laughed bitterly. "You think that guy was grateful? People don't change." Marcus glanced at him briefly in the mirror. "Some do," he said calmly. The man snorted and leaned back, crossing his arms. The ride ended without incident. No stars, no comment. Marcus sat in the car afterward, engine idling, heart steady. He hadn't reacted. That mattered. Across the city, Ethan Walker faced his own tests. Returning to work was harder than he expected. His colleagues were polite. Too polite. Conversations paused when he entered rooms. Some people avoided him. Others asked invasive questions disguised as concern. "Man, that was intense," one coworker said. "Must have been wild." Ethan nodded, tight-lipped. It wasn't wild. It was humbling. During a team meeting, a junior employee, a black woman in her 20s, shared an idea. Her voice was quiet, her words careful. The room moved on without acknowledging her. Ethan felt his stomach twist. This time, he didn't stay silent. "Wait," Ethan said, raising a hand. She was saying something important. All eyes turned. The woman blinked, surprised. Ethan nodded at her. "Please, finish." The idea landed. Heads nodded. Notes were taken. After the meeting, the woman approached him. "Thanks," she said softly. Ethan met her eyes. "You shouldn't have needed it." She gave a small smile, but it mattered. That night, Ethan sat alone in his apartment, leg propped up, ice pack melting slowly. He replayed the moment in the supermarket, covering his nose, shaking his head, walking away. He didn't recognize that man anymore, and that frightened him more than guilt ever had. A week later, Marcus received an unexpected message through the Grab app. "Passenger feedback. Thank you for treating me like a person." Marcus stared at the screen for a long moment. He didn't know who sent it. He didn't need to. Later that evening, Marcus found himself driving past the stretch of road on Santa Monica Boulevard where the accident had happened. The wreckage was gone now. Fresh paint covered the scar on the median. No sign anything had ever happened there. But Marcus slowed instinctively, not out of fear, out of respect. He pulled over briefly, stepped out of the car, and stood in the quiet. No cameras, no applause, just the hum of distant traffic. He thought about how easily he could have chosen differently that night, how many people would have understood, and how heavy that understanding would have felt. Back in the car, Marcus checked the time. Another ride request came in. He accepted it, because doing the right thing once didn't make you good. Doing it again, when no one was watching, was the real work. If you're still listening, stay with this story. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, because in the next scene, the paths of Marcus and Ethan will cross one final time, and we'll see what remains after everything else has faded. The cafe on the corner of West Hollywood was quiet in the late afternoon, the kind of place people came not to be seen, but to think. Soft jazz hummed through hidden speakers. Sunlight spilled through tall windows, catching dust in the air like suspended time. Marcus Allen sat near the window, a cup of black coffee cooling slowly in front of him. He hadn't planned to be there. After dropping off his last rider, he'd driven without thinking, letting habit choose the route. When he realized where he was, he parked anyway. Some places carried weight. Avoiding them didn't make the weight disappear. The bell above the door chimed. Marcus didn't look up at first, but he felt it, the pause, the hesitation in the room, the quiet shift of energy that came with someone who was unsure whether to step forward or turn back. "Marcus." The voice was careful. Marcus lifted his eyes. Ethan Walker stood a few feet away, no crutches now, but moving slower than before. His leg was still stiff, his posture less certain. Gone was the sharp confidence he once carried like armor. "You mind if I sit?" Ethan asked. Marcus studied him for a moment, then gestured to the chair across from him. "Go ahead." Ethan sat, hands folded together, shoulders slightly hunched. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me again," Ethan said. Marcus took a sip of his coffee. "I didn't know either." Silence settled, not awkward, not tense, just honest. "I've been thinking about that night," Ethan continued. "Not the accident, the beginning." Marcus nodded once. "I keep asking myself how many times I've done that to people," Ethan said quietly. "Judged them, dismissed them, walked away." Marcus's gaze stayed steady. And I can't count them," Ethan admitted. "That scares me." Marcus leaned back slightly. "Fear can be useful." Ethan looked up. "How?" "If it makes you pay attention," Marcus said. Ethan nodded slowly. "I'm trying." The barista passed by, refilling Marcus's cup without asking. Ethan declined when she offered him coffee. "I don't know how to undo what I did," Ethan said. "I know I can't." Marcus watched the steam rise from his cup. "No, you can't." Ethan swallowed. "But I want you to know, I don't expect forgiveness." Marcus met his eyes. "Good." Ethan flinched slightly, then managed a small, sad smile. "You don't pull punches," I don't waste words, Marcus replied. Another pause. I did something after I got out of the hospital, Ethan said. I talked to my company. We're changing some things. Training, accountability measures. Marcus nodded. That's a start. It felt small, Ethan admitted, compared to what you did. Marcus shook his head. You didn't see it from my side. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Marcus set his cup down carefully. I didn't save you because I'm better than you. I saved you because I didn't want that moment to turn me into someone I'm not. Ethan absorbed that in silence. That choice wasn't about you, Marcus continued. It was about me. Ethan's eyes glistened. I think that's what hurts the most, he said softly. That you showed me a version of myself I didn't recognize by staying true to who you already were. Marcus didn't deny it. They sat there as the afternoon light shifted, shadows lengthening across the floor. Finally, Ethan stood. I won't take more of your time, he said. I just wanted to thank you again, not for saving my life. Marcus raised an eyebrow slightly. For showing me how thin the line is between decency and cruelty, Ethan finished. Marcus stood as well. That line shows up every day, he said. Most people just pretend it isn't there. Ethan nodded. I won't. They shook hands, firm, respectful, no forgiveness spoken, no absolution granted, and none required. Ethan turned and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, he glanced back. I hope our paths don't cross again, he said gently. Marcus smiled faintly. That wouldn't be a bad thing. The bell chimed as Ethan stepped out into the street. Marcus returned to his seat, finished his coffee, and stared out the window. The city moved on, indifferent and alive. And for the first time since that night, Marcus felt no weight pulling him backward. If you're still listening, stay with this story. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, because in the final scene, we'll see what a full circle really looks like when dignity refuses to disappear. Marcus Allen didn't mark the day as an anniversary. He didn't circle it on a calendar or replay it like a highlight. Life moved forward the way it always had, quietly, steadily, without asking for permission. But some mornings, when the city was still half asleep and the sky over Los Angeles carried that soft gray blue before sunrise, Marcus remembered. Not the insult, not the smoke, not even the fear. He remembered the choice. He parked his Grab near a small overlook above the city, engine off, windows down. The air was cool, clean in a way it never felt during the day. Down below, traffic began to wake, lines of headlights forming like veins carrying life through concrete. Marcus stretched his shoulders and checked the app. Another ride request would come soon. They always did. He thought about how easily things could have gone differently, how no one would have blamed him if he'd driven past that burning car, how the world would have understood his silence. But understanding wasn't the same as peace. Marcus had learned that a long time ago. His phone buzzed, not a ride request, but a message. Unknown number. This is Ethan. I don't expect a reply. I just wanted you to know I followed through. Marcus stared at the screen. A second message followed. I volunteer twice a week now, and when I catch myself judging, I stop. I hear your voice telling me to stay awake. Marcus exhaled slowly. He typed nothing back. He didn't need to. Change didn't require witnesses. That afternoon, Marcus picked up a young couple near Echo Park. They argued quietly in the back seat, tension thick but contained. When they got out, the woman paused. Thank you, she said, for driving and for listening. Marcus nodded. Take care. As the door closed, he glanced at the rearview mirror and saw his own eyes looking back, steady, unburdened. Later, he stopped at a corner store to grab water. A man ahead of him dropped his wallet without noticing. Marcus bent down, picked it up, and tapped the man's shoulder. "Hey," Marcus said. "You dropped this." The man blinked, surprised, then smiled. "Thanks, brother." Brother. Marcus didn't cling to the word, but he didn't reject it either. That evening, Marcus called his mother. "I heard about the man you saved," she said gently. "People talk." Marcus smiled faintly. "They always do." She paused. "You okay?" "I am," Marcus replied. "I really am." After the call, Marcus sat on his couch as the city lights flickered on outside his window. Somewhere out there, people were making choices. Small ones, quiet ones, ones that would never be recorded. He hoped they chose well, because the truth was simple. Dignity wasn't loud. Integrity didn't announce itself. And doing the right thing didn't always feel good in the moment. But it lasted. Marcus checked the app one last time before bed. One final ride request appeared. He accepted it. As he pulled away from the curb, the city stretched out before him, endless and imperfect and alive. And Marcus Allen drove forward, not as a symbol, not as a lesson, not as a hero, but as the man he had always chosen to be. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't about justice served or apologies given. They're about quiet choices made in the dark, and the people who keep making them, even when no one is watching.